Good evening, builders. Welcome to my welding shop. Today we're going to be learning the basics of operating a MIG welder. This is one of the easier processes to learn, so let's get started. The MIG process uses an electrode wire that is spooled out. This wire becomes the filler metal that will fill in the puddle of the weld. In addition to the wire, the MIG torch has these small holes through which a shielding gas passes. This shielding gas protects the weld from moisture and oxygen in the environment when it's in its molten state. In this case, we're using C25, which is a mixture of 75% argon and 25% carbon dioxide. It is important that you leave your gloves on the whole time that you're working in the shop. A lot of times metal that looks to be not hot can be very hot and can very easily burn your hands. The other thing I expect to be wearing the whole time that you're in my shop is going to be safety glasses. In addition to wearing the safety glasses when we're doing grinding operations, I'm going to have you wear the face shield. Now this might seem a little redundant to be wearing two types of eye protection, but the sparks and other nasties that you're going to be working with often will get past one of these, but I've never known them to get past both of them. Now as far as protecting your feet, what you want is an all-leather closed-toed shoe. Boots are nice, they'll keep some of the sparks out of your feet, but this is the part you want to make sure is made out of leather. If you have something like this where it's a synthetic or fabric on the front, the sparks will fall through and burn your feet. That's not a good situation. Particularly since this is a synthetic, it's going to hurt even worse. Which brings me to my next point. You need to be wearing long sleeve shirts that are made with 100% cotton. Denim is the easiest way to do that because all denim is made pretty much with 100% cotton. There are other types of shirts that are oftentimes made with a lot of cotton in them. Most of your flannel shirts are 100% cotton. Sometimes dress shirts are made with 100% cotton. Sometimes they won't say it here. Sometimes you have to look for the tag here. If you look carefully right there, it says 100% cotton. That's what you want. The reason is that if you weld with something like this, this is a synthetic. This one is 100% polyester. I'll show you a demonstration in a second. But if you weld with something that has a lot of synthetic in it, be it polyester, nylon, or poly anything, if it catches fire or a weld bead falls on it, it will actually burn the plastic to your skin. So I don't want to show you this to scare you. It's not real common for your clothes to catch fire while you're welding, but it can happen. It's happened to me a couple of times. But if you're wearing cotton, it's not a big deal. I mean, you could just tap it out and you see I didn't even burn myself. Not that scary. Now if you're welding in synthetic clothes and they happen to catch fire, it's a very different scenario. You notice as this starts to catch, you see that instead of just burning and sloughing away, it kind of forms a globby, sticky substance, and it'll start to drip. So I'm not going to put this out with my hands because if I do, I will get burned, at least a 2nd degree burn. So you can see that if something bad were to happen and you did have your shirt catch on fire and you have this globby, burny, drippy stuff sticking to your skin, that's very bad. So while it's not very likely that you're going to get seriously injured, this will make the difference between a 1st degree and a 2nd degree burn in a minor situation. And if you have something that goes really bad wearing this, it can put you needing to go visit your local hospital's burn ward, and we don't want that to happen. So the safe thing to do is just wear 100% cotton, and then anytime you do get burned, it's very unlikely to be a big problem. We can also use treated fabrics that are designed not to combust. But in the type of welding that we're going to be doing, the risk is very low so long as you're wearing 100% cotton. So please take the time to go and make sure that you have the right equipment to wear so that we can safely weld in the shop. We're going to begin this process by cutting and grinding some coupons for our welding practice. So the first thing I'm going to do is measure off every 3 inches. This is 3-inch wide material. I want to measure every 3, 6, 9, and 12 inches so that I can make some little squares that we can weld on. I'm using a soapstone. This is a riding implement that doesn't go away when it gets hot, which is very useful for welding and grinding and other such things. It's easy to see. So with my face shield in place, I'm now going to go ahead and grind the edges where we're going to be welding. There's a mill scale on this we have to get clean, so we need to be able to put welds down on bare metal. So to do that, we're going to grind this edge, the sides, and a little bit underneath. To cut the coupons off, we're going to use a reciprocating saw, also known as a sawzall. The important thing to do here is to keep that shoe pressed hard up against the steel, otherwise it'll knock you around. So place the shoe up against the steel, turn it on, and you're going to rock the blade into the part. That's all it takes. So at this point we should have 4 coupons, each with 2 clean edges that we can weld on. So another good way we have of cutting the steel is using the abrasive cutoff saw. So what we're going to do is get this little white line right in the middle of the opening. Make sure this little clamp is folded over and tighten it good and tight. It's important that it doesn't move while we plunge down. We're going to squeeze the trigger here and pull gently towards the ground. It's really important that we wear a face shield while we do this and make sure that the sparks aren't going to go anywhere dangerous. Bear in mind this steel is going to be hot and sharp, so don't handle it without gloves. Also note that the full thickness of this abrasive blade is going to be taken out of the material, so make sure you account for that when you are making your measurements. It's not going to matter this time, but when you make a project that can be really important. Now we still need to clean the edges of the coupon to get the mill scale and get a slight bevel on the coupons, and you might be tempted to hand hold a grinder and grind it this way. I hope you can tell that that's not a smart thing to do, and we're not going to do that. The way that we are going to bevel the edges and get the mill slag off is using a belt sander. So if it's a small coupon, we don't want to hold it in our hands lest our hands get pulled into the grinder. So with that clamp we can put on our face shield, power it up, and bevel the edges. So one thing just to know about the sander is you can use the flat spot here for beveling, but the fastest material rate is going to be up here at the top on the roller. So as I'm sanding, you'll notice that I'll use the top and the flat spot here. Be really careful that you don't end up wedging the material in between this flat platen and the belt, or you can tear the belt or lose control of the workpiece. Bear in mind the belt sander will get the coupon hot and the edges can still be sharp unless you've ground them really nice and soft. So we are going to continue to wear gloves. Now we have 3 sides this time, ground, beveled, and cleaned on both sides, which allow us to weld on all 3 of these sides. Now we can grind these with the angle grinder by clamping them in a vise. We just wouldn't want to do that handheld. Again, we got to get this mill scale off and get the edges beveled so we'll take a weld. It's really important that you don't look directly at the arc while you're welding. We have these hoods with which you can cover your eyes while you're welding. These are the kind that auto darken. So as soon as a flash of light hits it, it will darken and obscure your vision. Most of welding is done by sound and feel. The visual feedback isn't quite as important as you might think it would be, but you need to be able to see a little bit where you're going, and that's what this will allow you to do. Now I'm going to set my two pieces, my two coupons, about maybe a half of the thickness of the material apart, not quite half. So that'll be 3/32 of an inch if you're keeping score at home. And clamp them together. I have the larger bevel on the upside. I'm going to use these clamps to hold them in place while we start welding. So what I'm going to do after the welder's turned on is I'm going to start on this side, and I'm going to make a little puddle here, come over to this side. I'm going to make kind of a C, bunch of C's down the part as I go on. I make my weld. There's going to be a puddle that's forming, and we're going to be filling this gap inside of it with the puddle, but remember, this is welding. We're not just trying to glue the two pieces together. We're actually melting both pieces into the puddle. Here's what you'll see under the hood as you're welding. So a couple things. You notice the weld is coming up. It's got a nice little hump to it. That's good. There's no undercutting. Sometimes you get a little bit, just a tiny bit right there. See how the material kind of dips in right at the edge? It means I've got just a little bit too much heat. Strongest welds will not have any of that. A couple of things that will help make your welds a little bit easier. Make sure you're keeping your wire about that long. You don't want it much longer than that. You want it so that you're just a little bit off the material without dragging the tip on the metal itself. As you're welding, you want to keep your tip a little bit on the short side if you want more heat, and a little bit on the long side if you're feeling like you're a little bit too hot. You can adjust a little bit of the amount of heat you have by adjusting the length of your electrode or your wire. It helps if you hold it with two hands. See, I've got one hand on the gun and one hand up here at the front, and that allows to keep a steady hand as you go in and make your C's back and forth and back and forth. Listen carefully to the sound it makes. It should sound a little bit like cooking bacon, a little bit of a crackle without pops or buzzes. Now I want to show you real quick what can happen if you don't have shielding gas on the weld while you go to weld. see how the weld kind of looks a little bit like styrofoam? It didn't sound right. And if you look, you can see that there's like porosity in the weld. It has more of a styrofoam texture to it. This is going to be a really weak weld. If you ever get that where you hear that the arc sound changes and it goes from cooking bacon to sounding different and not quite right, check to make sure your tip isn't clogged. Sometimes it'll be because this little gunk has gotten in here and blocking the shielding gas that's coming through your nozzle. It could be that you're out of gas, or it could be that someone turned it off like I just did. And once you've had enough fun welding on flat pieces of metal, we can move on to play with some other configurations. Well, thank you for joining me in my welding shop today. I hope you have a meaningful and enjoyable experience learning how to weld.